It has been quite some time since I've done a mailbag video. I used to rotate these videos between hot takes and mailbag back in the day, and I thought it would be a great time to do one to see where your guys' heads are at with this franchise, things that are on your mind. It's always nice to see you guys getting involved into the content instead of just hearing me ramble for 10 minutes. So without further ado, let's get into some of these questions. So what's going on, everyone? You're listening to Bulls Central here. Hope you're all doing well. Now, I tried to answer as many questions as I could, consolidated some questions that were more or less the same, and some of these I'll go through a little bit more quickly, and some I'll dive into a little bit more as the answer is more nuanced than just a simple reply. And I'll start with this one, which is kind of right to the point here in terms of how we're all feeling right now as Bulls fans. But this question comes from Ken Book. Is there a reason to be optimistic for this team's near-term future? It depends on how near-term you're talking about. If it's for this upcoming season, no, not so much. But beyond that, I would say it's a little bit more optimistic than people are giving them credit for. Look, the Bulls' future is not bright, all right? I don't think anyone would say that it is at this point, but as I've said before, it's not as bleak and a doomsday type scenario as some Bulls fans are making it out to be. I mean, aside from next year's first round pick, which is top 10 protected owed to the Spurs, the Bulls have all of their first round picks at their disposal. Coby and Ayo are both coming off great seasons as part of the Bulls' young core that they can build with. I don't think either of them are going to be star level players or franchise players, but they're promising athletes that still have upside given their growth from last season. Patrick Williams, I mean, the jury is still out on him, but if you remember, he was playing some of his best basketball of his career before getting injured last season. Not in the beginning of the stretch last year because no one was playing well at that time, but after the Bulls got their act together and played well without Zach Lavine, Pat was a key piece for the Bulls' success at that point. Again, I wouldn't get my hopes up because we've always seen flashes of the potential, but never really seen it over a sustained period of time. But between Pat, Ayo, Coby, Julian Phillips, the Bulls have the 11th pick in this year's draft. They have draft capital for the future or even to use in the form of a trade if they choose. I think the biggest thing that gives me pause as it relates to the future of this team is their current cap situation, where they're more or less kind of hamstrung by Zach Lavine and Vucevic's contract, both players that have little to no value on the trade market. In the short term, meaning this season, there really isn't much the Bulls can do to make meaningful changes when they're already an over-the-cap team. They claim they want to re-sign DeMar and Pat, which effectively means they're going to be running it back since they won't be able to make changes otherwise if they do so. So for this upcoming season, yeah, there isn't much to be optimistic about unless the Bulls get really creative, which I don't see how they can do. But beyond this season, Lonzo's contract comes off the books. You go into an expiring deal for Vucevic. Zach Lavine then only has 2 more years left on his deal, which could make his trade value a little more enticing. So a long-winded answer to your question, I wouldn't say there is a lot to be optimistic about, but it isn't as bleak as some people claim. Next up, we've got Sub-Zero. Who is a big man we should target in free agency or a trade if we do not draft one? Well, first of all, the Bulls better draft one. I made a whole video about how I've always been a draft the best player available kind of guy. But when you're the Bulls and your roster is filled with guards and you're starting 6'4" guys at power forward, yeah, you need to get some bigs. And that will even be more so the case if Drummond doesn't return and leaves in free agency, which a lot of reporters are saying is likely. But if they don't draft a big man, maybe they draft a shooting wing, which I would be okay with, just no guards please. But as far as who they should pursue if they don't draft a big man, I might have said this before briefly, either here on the channel or on Twitter, but if the Cavs are making Jarrett Allen available, which it sounds like they are, the Bulls should be seeing what it takes to acquire him. I think the main reason why I think it's unlikely the Bulls will be able to get Allen is what exactly do the Bulls have to offer the Cavs that would be attractive enough for them in a trade? They're not going to be interested in Vucevic. Doubtful they would want Patrick Williams if they do a sign-and trade. Would the Cavs want picks? Probably not, considering they're a team that is trying to win now while they have Donovan Mitchell. Now, obviously that could change if they pivot and look to trade Mitchell if they can't agree on an extension, and then maybe the Cavs go down a rebuilding route. But I have a hard time seeing them getting it done. But that would be one option where I think the Bulls should look to be aggressive in pursuing and adding some size and rim protection to get a player like Jarrett Allen. And then the other guy I would love to see the Bulls pursue as a free agent is Nick Claxton. The problem is the Bulls don't have the cap space to sign him, as I'm sure Claxton is going to command more than the full mid-level exception, which is the most the Bulls would be able to offer him. And even then, it would still put the Bulls over the tax, which we know is not going to happen with this team. But if they could maybe work out a sign-and trade of some kind and include some draft assets for the Nets, I feel like they would maybe bite on that, because the Nets, after their failed big three and trading away all of their future draft capital, they need every pick they can get to try and rebuild their roster. And I think Claxton would be a perfect fit for the Bulls. A great shot blocker, strong rebounder, great at getting second chance points, long, athletic, only 25, so he would fit a potential timeline if you're trying to build with the Bulls' younger core. That's a guy I would love to see in a Bulls uniform, and one that is probably a bit more attainable than someone like Jared Allen. Before I go into the other questions though, guys, real quick, Underdog Fantasy still has their latest offer. When you sign up, they're now not only giving you a special pick in your pick'ems to increase your odds of hitting, you can also get up to $250 in bonus cash upon your first deposit. For those that aren't familiar with Underdog, let me tell you about the app real quick. My personal favorite that I use on the app, NBA Pick'ems. With Pick'ems, you can get higher or lower on most players' stats and win money based on the ones you get right, up to 100 times your money, in fact. So, like I mentioned, take advantage of the special offer, especially with the NBA Finals coming about. Sign up with the promo code BULLCENTRAL to get a special pick in the lobby and up to $250 in bonus cash on your first deposit. I'll leave a link to the site and the code in the description. Next up, we've got Arturo Dominguez. Would it be better to run it back with Lavine or DeRozan alongside Coby and Vucevic? Not sure I would say Vuce is a piece that we run it back with, but I think the point of your question is, keeping all things equal, does it make more sense to keep DeMar or Zach? And my answer for this one is actually pretty simple. If we're looking at it in a vacuum and not factoring in costs as it relates to what a contract extension would look like for DeMar, but keeping DeMar makes more sense in my eyes, mainly because if you have to keep one, I'm going to take not only the better player between the two, but the better leader and mentor for the younger guys. Yeah, Zach is younger than DeMar, so long term, maybe it would make more sense from that perspective. But if you're thinking about how you go about developing your young players for the future, I want a veteran like DeMar to be there over someone like Zach Lavine. Next, we've got Debo2288. Do you think the Bulls should go after Brandon Ingram, and would that help us? I've seen a lot of fans talking about the Bulls and how they should pursue Ingram, maybe even having that be the path to actually trade Zach Lavine. Well, I think Ingram is a fine player. I don't really see how that moves the needle for the Bulls at all. You talk about a player who is fairly redundant scoring-wise to that of DeMar DeRozan. He takes more threes, sure, but not that many more, and he isn't that efficient or known for his three-point shooting. Not that great of a defender despite his length, an okay rebounder, but like DeMar, he's a solid passer and has great instincts on the court. He's 26, so I'll take the youth factor over someone like DeMar DeRozan, but he's also been much more injury-prone, while DeMar is one of the most durable players over this last decade. I just don't see how that helps the Bulls much overall when it's yet another fairly heavy isolation, mid-range player who doesn't speed up the overall flow and pace of your offense. And honestly, I'm not sure what the Pelicans would be interested in at this point from the Bulls to make a trade like this even feasible. Next up, we've got my guy over at Bloody Horns Podcast, another fellow Bulls content creator. Be sure to check out his work. Least favorite season in your Bulls lifetime. Man, that's honestly tough because there have been a lot of frustrating seasons. The first year under Fred Hoiberg comes to mind, the last one with Rose and Noah where they missed the playoffs and then Rose and Noah were gone by the offseason. The following season, the 3 Alphas year, kind of similar. Even just the last 2 seasons, those have been very frustrating. For some reason, the season before this one, the 22-23 season, was much more frustrating to me than last year. I think mainly because we all thought Lonzo was going to be coming back at some point. For the most part, the guys were healthy outside of Lonzo, of course, and they still just weren't that good, and they missed the playoffs. But if I had to choose one season that was the most frustrating, and it's really because I didn't know any better at the time, but it was the 98-99 season, the lockout year when the Bulls dynasty had been torn down, and growing up and seeing the Bulls win multiple championships and be dominant every season, and it's all that I knew. I didn't know any better and was spoiled thinking that this was just how every year was going to be watching this team. And reality smacked me in the face as a 13, 14-year-old kid to see my team that I cheered for go from dynasty to the bottom of the league. And I had a hard time accepting that. And for me, that was the most frustrating thing. I'm sure maturity played a factor into it as well when you don't take losing that well as a teenager compared to when you're an adult. Next up, we've got Spida XJ. What's your opinion on Dalen Terry? I don't know. I keep going back and forth on this kid. First and foremost, my opinion on him isn't very high. He seems like a fun dude, good kid, but just strictly on the basketball court, I don't see this insane ceiling or anything like that. I do think he'll get better, and I think if given the right opportunity, he could develop into a nice role player. But that's it. The biggest thing that's holding Dalen Terry back right now is his jump shot. He's got to work on that shot. You can't have a broken jumper in this league unless you really excel at something else. And while Terry is decent at quite a few things, he's a solid defender, scrappy, high energy guy, likes to push the pace, he's an okay passer, but there isn't anything he does exceedingly well. And I'm not too optimistic for Dalen Terry's future, and it's unfortunate that we used a first-round pick on him. But I hope that he can prove me wrong and be a big contributor for this Bulls team in the future. The next one, when you look at the talent of teams throughout the league, past history aside, is it safe to say that the Bulls have rendered themselves totally irrelevant for the next 10 to 15 years at least? I mean, 10 to 15 years is a long time, but man, a lot can change, not only between the landscape of the league at large, but the trajectory of the Bulls and their franchise if they happen to get lucky and land a once-in-a-generation type talent in the draft. I mean, 15 years from now, aside from maybe Julian Phillips, all the guys on the Bulls roster are going to be out of the league by then. So while the Bulls might be irrelevant now, and it's a painful time to be a fan, it's short-sighted to say that it's going to remain the case for the next 10 to 15 years from now. Now, as long as the Reindorfs are the owners, I can kind of see your point to an extent, but you'd have to think at some point, even during that time period over the next 10 to 15 years, even if they don't win a title, they're still going to be relevant at some point. But anyway, guys, I'll end it there for this edition of your Mailbag episode. Appreciate all of you who left your questions. Keep the questions coming throughout the off season. As always, be sure to subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.